ejaguar.com. And we will wait and see if we can get Dan and IQ in here, and we will get things off and running. Like I said, we've got our stuff over there on BitChute as well. But while we wait on Dan and IQ to get with us here, Jennifer, how has your book been doing, my friend? Because I know you've been doing a lot of media appearances and all sorts of things here lately.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going really well. Launched in June, and it's just kind of been a whirlwind of promotion, being featured in publications, doing podcast interviews, radio shows, things like that. But it's been good. It's been overwhelming in a good way, if that explains it.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Well, we are going to see if, for whatever reason, Dan Perkins did not pick up, and I was just talking to him before the commercial break. So I'm not sure why his Skype is not working. So we're going to see if we can get Dan back in here on our big program. And I believe I've got IQ Rizzoli. IQ, can you hear me, my friend? I think I've got IQ. IQ, are you there? It looks like he's there. I don't know. Maybe not. Who knows? It is technology. We were switching from Skype call to Skype call, so sometimes people get lost in, I guess the Skype universe. I don't know what the hell you would even call it. So Jennifer, your book is, I don't really think it's controversial, but I know there's a lot of people, I'm sure, that think it's very controversial. In all of your press appearances and things, have you run into any type of issues?
I have, yeah. So I was supposed to be scheduled to be on a television station in Nashville, where I'm located. And so a producer had originally reached out to me to come into the studio and do a live interview. And then it was just like the day before the interview, the news director and the manager there decided that it was not okay for me to talk about drugs, so that got canceled, which is fine. I guess that some people aren't up to all the latest information on psychedelics and still think that these are somehow like hard drugs when they're absolutely not. They're being used medicinally, and they're, all of the different hospitals that are university hospitals or teaching hospitals, they are studying psilocybin in clinical trials to treat things like PTSD, depression, anxiety, lots of other conditions that it's being studied for. So it's sort of funny to me that these sort of out of date old guys, I guess, news directors, no offense to old guys, but maybe a little bit.
I'm not a big fan of old guys. Old white guys seem to be the bane of everyone's existence here the last couple of years for whatever reason.
For sure.
So one of the things that I like about your book, while we wait on, I don't know what is going on with Dan.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I've got you, IQ. I'm trying to get Dan in here, and for whatever reason, his Skype is not working. I don't know what is going on. So we'll see if I can make a call here, and maybe this will get Dan in here, because I know Dan would really like to. Part of the reason why we got you on today is because Dan wanted to talk to you today, Jennifer. But so with all the studying and all the different things that you did with this, did you have a different attitude coming out of writing the book as you did going in, or how did all that work?
Yeah. I mean, I think I had a lot to learn about how psilocybin actually works in the body. What are the mechanisms and stuff that happens in the brain? And so I feel so much more knowledgeable about it than I did going into writing the book. I mean, obviously I have a science and medical background in terms of as a journalist. And so, this is sort of my forte, is digging into research and stuff like that. But definitely I had a lot to learn. And I still feel like I have a lot to learn going forward. Even though I wrote the book, there's so much information out there about psychedelics, and I've only studied one of them. I've only studied psilocybin, so I would love to dig into research on the other ones like LSD, which people more commonly know as acid, or MDMA, people more commonly know as either ecstasy or Molly. Those are the sort of street names.
I've always wondered why the hell they call it Molly. I don't understand where some of these names come from with some of these things.
Yeah. Acid makes sense for lysergic acid. But yeah, Molly,
makes
I don't know. I'm not up on the lingo.
That's awesome. Well, the thing I've always wondered is how do some of these things get their names? I just that's a completely different conversation for a different kind of world. But I think we've got Dan finally joining us here. The great Dan Perkins with us today. DanPerkins.guru is his official website. And, of course, we have the fantastic IQ Rizzoli as well. And Jennifer Chesnick is with us. And she has got an incredible book. It is about psilocybin, or as it's commonly referred to on the street as magic mushrooms. And Jennifer wrote this book about, well, kind of give us a little bit of more details here now that Dan has joined us. Tell us a little bit more about your book here.
Sure. So it's called the Psilocybin Handbook for Women. I have it right here. And it's the subtitle, which is, I can never remember it, is How Magic Mushrooms, Psychedelic Therapy, and Microdosing Can Benefit Your Mental, Physical, and Spiritual Health. So it's really merging the science on psilocybin with science on women's health, and then how can psilocybin be used to help women with their health in different contexts. So whether that's they're going through menopause, or they're dealing with some type of menstrual disorder like premenstrual dysphoric disorder, things like that, or just, anxiety, depression, PTSD, all of these things disproportionately affect women. So just covering all that.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about with Dan in the past is, and we've also had some other authors on fairly recently, because apparently this is a hot topic. A lot of people are writing books about magic mushrooms for some reason. We interviewed a gentleman, I don't know, what I would say probably 3-4 months ago. Me and IQ, I think, interviewed this gentleman. I think might have been with Dan, might have been with Dawn, hell, it might have been with both of them, about giving magic mushrooms to war veterans and people coming back from war, and how this seems to work. What have you noticed with the other side of things, with going with women? What was some of your, I guess, research from that?
Sure. So I think one of the things that was really surprising to me was that some women are using some psychedelics more frequently than men are. And that was surprising because it just seems like a lot of men are introducing psychedelics to women, whereas women didn't have any interest in them before. But when I dug a little deeper, it actually made more sense. So women are actually using psychedelics to self-treat for conditions. So like PTSD, again, depression, anxiety, but also chronic pain conditions. And this made a lot of sense to me because the mainstream medical system typically is like, oh, women don't really matter. We'll focus on men, and I think I've talked to you about this before, but women were largely excluded from early stage clinical trials until the 1990s. And so men got a drug for male sexual dysfunction in 1998. Everyone knows that drug. It's Viagra.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, for women's health, the medical community didn't even have a complete picture of what the clitoris is. So, because there's all this internal structure that people aren't aware about. And so that was studied in 2005. And it wasn't until 2015 that women got a drug for female sexual dysfunction. So this is a 17-year gap between when men got a drug and when women got a drug. And to me, that's just not acceptable. But again, going back to why are women using psychedelics to self-treat, it's because we aren't treated ethically or fairly in the mainstream medical system. And I've had firsthand experience with that in terms of being gaslit at the doctor's office about a condition that I have that's proven that I have it, proven in terms of, they've surgically checked for it. I have endometriosis, and it affects 1 in 10 women. And so that, that's 10% of our population, yet the National Institutes of Health only designated less than 0.1% of research to this condition, which, really impacts women's lives. And so I remember one time being at the ER for for chronic, it was pain related to endometriosis. And the ER doctor said, you don't take a Ford to a Chevy dealership. Like, what the heck does that even mean? I'm at the ER and we're talking about my uterus, not a truck, not an F-150. So it was insane to me that occurred. It would never have occurred to a man, I mean, and meaning if a man had gone to the ER for chronic pain, he would have been treated for chronic pain.
They would have never treated him that way. Well, Dan has joined us, and as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we've talked about in the past is we've talked about magic mushrooms and psilocybin being used with PTSD and things with veterans, and your book focuses on women and magic mushrooms. Dan, I know you've probably got some questions due to the fact that you're a man and not a woman. But
most of the time.
Jump in there, Dan. What kind of questions here do you have for Jennifer about her new book?
What kind of pushback are you getting from women?
From women? I'm not getting any pushback from women. Women are messaging me like crazy on Instagram, asking me questions, telling me their own stories, their experiences with psilocybin. So women are not pushing back on me at all.
But see, I think that's an interesting situation that I'm not putting words in your mouth, that 100% of the women agree with what you're saying. I find that hard to believe.
I'm not saying 100%. I'm just saying that I haven't heard from any women who are saying, why did you write this book? I don't want you to have written this book. I just haven't heard from those people yet. If they're out there, I welcome hearing from them.
Okay. So what are the alternatives besides your what you espouse in your book? Are there any other alternatives for women?
Sure. I mean, so again, psilocybin is often used to treat depression, anxiety, or PTSD. And so, you could essentially take an antidepressant, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SSRI. Lots of people are on those. There's nothing wrong with that. But the difference between taking an SSRI and taking psilocybin is pretty dramatic. So SSRIs blunt your mood. So not only do they blunt your lows, but they blunt your highs. So you have less enjoyment out of life in many ways. And what happens with psilocybin is it makes you more okay with your highs and lows. So when you have these mood fluctuations, it makes you feel a little bit more okay with that. So yeah, sure, there are plenty of alternatives out there for treating anxiety. You could meditate. You can, again, take an antidepressant. There are other things like mood stabilizers. Those are available and they've been studied, and lots of them are effective, but also not effective for everyone. And, especially with PTSD and veterans, we know that that's just not effective, or we would have a solution for that, and we just don't.
Right. So what about quality control of the product?
Well, I mean, that's something that we have to work out as a society. Currently there's a patchwork of legality in terms of psilocybin. So it's, available, it's legalized or decriminalized in certain states and certain municipalities, but federally across the country, it's still illegal. So it's similar in how cannabis started out as being fully illegal all over the U.S., and then we gained this sort of patchwork of legality and decriminalization. So in terms of what do we do for quality control, I mean, I think we need to have some guidelines in place for when it is being used in a healthcare setting with for like psilocybin assisted therapy. If a therapist is providing that medication, how are they getting it, where it's coming from? These are all things that are sort of being worked out right now by the industry. And what I mean by the industry is in terms of so Johns Hopkins University studies psilocybin, and there are tons of other, university hospitals that are studying this as well. So these things will come along. Now, I don't recommend that people go out and hunt mushrooms, because there's plenty of very, very toxic mushrooms out there, and you're only going to have to try that once because you're going to die in certain cases of certain mushrooms. So yes, we do need some type of quality control in place, I believe, for psilocybin in many cases. Now, there are underground guides who do grow it themselves. You can order the spores and you can grow it. I'm not recommending that anyone do that, because it's technically illegal to do that at this point. That will, I mean, in most places, I think some states have started to legalize these things. But yeah, I mean, in general, yes, we will need some quality control things going on.
So when a state, you mentioned just a moment ago that some states have approved it, did they approve regulatory enforcement, quality control standards, things like that, reporting?
The one that's probably the furthest along would be Oregon. They've legalized psilocybin-assisted therapy, and so there's a regulatory board and everything in place there. And this is starting to roll out soon in terms of having this available. So there are states will probably have some of their own quality control situations going on, and then as legality increases, but likely the government will. Eventually will be FDA approved for MDMA assisted therapy. So MDMA is ecstasy or Molly on the street, but MDMA is the clinical term. And that is getting closer to being approved by the FDA than psilocybin. And I think that will pave the way for psilocybin to also be FDA approved, perhaps maybe in 2025. Or maybe a few years later or something like that. But there is processes in place where this is probably moving in that direction. And so again, I'm hoping that once we have FDA approval, we'll have a little bit more solid regulatory efforts surrounding that for safety and things like that. But in general, psilocybin itself is very non-toxic. It's similar to cannabis in that you can't overdose on cannabis in terms of like you're not going to OD and die, and same thing with psilocybin. It's non-toxic. You're not going to it's not something like fentanyl, it's not a hard drug like that.
So when they were going through the process over the years of trying to decriminalize cannabis, their immediate approach or their initial approach was to treat it as medical. So they said we had medical marijuana. Well, there is no plant in the ground that says, gee, I'm medical marijuana. It's marijuana, period. And so they positioned it to the consumer that this was something different than the regular cannabis that you bought on the street. In the case of this product, what about it for recreational use like cannabis now?
Oh, well, I mean, people have been using psilocybin recreationally for a long time, underground essentially. But there is legalization in certain areas now where it can be used recreationally. Like, I don't know all the logistics of each single law in different cities or states, but that is starting to change where, like, if you were in Colorado and, you had some magic mushrooms on you and you got stopped by the cops for whatever reason, they're not going to arrest you for having psilocybin on you, whether or not you were planning to use it recreationally or medicinally.
There was a very interesting story about a week to 10 days ago about what's happening to the cannabis market in California, more specifically in Los Angeles, that the black market product is just eating the lunch of the regulated product because of a huge price differential. The regulated product is so heavily taxed that it's forcing people to go to the black market to buy cannabis under the table. Do you see this happening with your mushroom product?
I don't think we're that far along in terms of legalization and decriminalization yet to see that, but that is a potential that would happen where it becomes too expensive to buy at a dispensary or whatever. And so people might choose to grow it themselves. Again, this is not legal everywhere to do that, so I'm not recommending anybody do that. But, again, you can just easily get the spores and buy a grow kit. And so I would guess that people would do that in areas where if they're running into an issue in terms of affordability.
There was, I believe I heard this correctly, Democratic candidate for the Democratic nomination president, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has been talking about the legalization of all these drugs and tax them and use the tax money to do other programs. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think there are some issues with this idea of So psilocybin is a sacred substance. It's been used by indigenous cultures for a long time. And we have other indigenous like substances that have been used by indigenous people and things like that. So it seems weird they like taxing and doing this extreme regulation of a sacred substance. But yeah, I'm not familiar with what Robert F. Kennedy is thinking about or planning. I know he's a strange fellow. That's all I really know.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
So, in looking at what's going on, it would appear that the consumers are increasingly reluctant to buy synthetic manufactured by pharmaceutical companies. They're more interested in having a natural product.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can look at cannabis to sort of walk through that a little bit. So you have, regular THC, so which would everyone thinks of as marijuana, that's Delta 9 THC. Now, lots of dispensaries out there and cannabis companies are producing what's called Delta 8 THC, and that's extracted rather than from the marijuana plant, that's extracted from the hemp plant. But there's not very much THC in the hemp plant. So by the time you extract it, you've created a synthetic product. And there is now research out there that when so nobody would even use Delta 8 if they had access to Delta 9 THC. So I live in Tennessee, and it's still illegal to buy Delta 9 THC here, but Delta 8 is allowed. And so that's why we even had Delta 8 come up, is because some states haven't legalized cannabis or haven't legalized marijuana at this point. But in states that haven't legalized marijuana, either recreationally or medicinally, or maybe both, we have more ER visits from young people using Delta 8. At that point, it's super synthetic, and it's a problem. You could have heavy metals in there, other chemicals that you don't want to be dealing with because of the extraction process. People want access to pure, to Delta 9 THC, which is a much purer natural substance. So again, yeah, I can see why people don't want to use something synthetic. It's because you're unsure of what's actually going into it. Now, there is a company out there that is producing synthetic psilocybin, and that is being used in some of those clinical trials. And, I would say that the general psychedelic community is kind of weirded out by that synthetic material, because it takes away from the original concept of what psilocybin is.
There are some people that are talking about that for example, on the marijuana side, and I want to ask you about the mushroom side, the potency of this generation's level of additives in marijuana are much stronger than they were 10, 20 years ago. They're growing a much stronger plant. Are we growing a much stronger mushroom for what we're trying to get out of it?
I don't think so, but I'm really not sure. I know what you're talking about in terms of the cannabis, but I don't know that is happening yet with psilocybin, or if that's even possible,
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good question.
So,
Thank you.
IQ Al Rizzoli, the last time that we had Jennifer on, which is what Dan will find this hilarious. The last time we had Jennifer on, when we had Jennifer on with IQ and Dawn, IQ spent half the interview thinking it was mushrooms that you cook with, not the mushrooms that. So I knew that would put a smile on Dan's face. So IQ, listening to today's conversation, and I'm sure that, like you do with everything, you immediately went and researched all sorts of different things. What kind of questions do you have for Jennifer today, if any?
Yes, the regulations that the government always put against cannabis and things like what you're talking about have always been irrational, actually. Counterproductive, utterly stupid. And yet they continue doing it.
I know.
Now, tell me, are they on mushrooms?
Are they on mushrooms? Maybe they should be. I think we would have some better government going on, but no, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Like, we make things illegal. So if you go back to the days of prohibition when they, outlawed alcohol, right? What did that create? That meant people went in, the backwoods and they made their moonshine, and it was way more potent than what the alcohol that was being sold in bars or liquor stores. I don't even know what they all had back in the day, but so that, moonshine that was really potent could cause blindness, I think, or something like that. There was something crazy going on there. And so, again, if we look now, I just talked it through the cannabis thing, what did that create when people, made it, when cannabis is illegal, then they come through with Delta 8, and that's causing ER visits. And it's the same thing if you even talk about heroin and fentanyl. So heroin is much more difficult to transport than fentanyl, because fentanyl requires just a small amount. We wouldn't even have fentanyl out on the market if heroin were legalized. Now, people push back on me when I say, oh, we should legalize heroin, but it just creates a bunch of crime that it is illegal, and people are going to use it anyway. They do. That's why we have all these overdoses happening. So why is it illegal and creating all of this crime? That's a hot take. But
absolutely true. It is totally counterproductive.
I agree.
They could make money out of it by legalizing it.
They would. Oh, yeah, you're right. Well, I mean, as we were seeing that with cannabis, you drive up. I live in Tennessee. You drive up to Illinois, and it's expensive to buy cannabis there, but they're taxing it.
Yeah. It's
Then
absolutely.
why do you think the government?
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, IQ.
Think the government do these stupid things regularly?
Oh, yeah.
The government
They're
government
experts at
does stupid things. Yes, they do.
it. They're experts at it. They have a lot of experience.
They're experts at it.
You're correct.
Well, this has been a fun conversation. I am glad we were able to get Jennifer on today with Dan and IQ. Before we wrap things up, let's start with IQ Rizzoli. IQ, how do we get your books and everything else?
My books are on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Lifting the Veil, The True Faces of Muhammad and Islam. All you have to do is Google my name, Al-Rassooli, ALRASSOOLI. It was a pleasure listening to you for a second time. I know that the mushroom I'm eating is not the same that you were talking about.
So, Dan, bring us up to speed on your projects and everything.
Well, we're in the process. I'm working with a web designer. We're talking about a total redesign of Black and White, and we're going to change the name to, you ready, Jim? Dan Perkins Media.
Dan Perkins Media. There we are.
And all of the shows and all the various projects that I'm working on will be on this particular site in links in individual squares, so you can click on any one of them anywhere you want and go to downloads, or here if it's on live.
That's
awesome. I'm signing a contract with the book publisher on Sad Eyes. Our target is to have 2 books in the series, and first book will be out just before Thanksgiving. Second book hopefully will be out by December the 6th. And then Lincoln will come out next fall, and I'm working on a new novel, thriller, and I don't know when that'll be out, but whatever. Whatever it is.
So, Jennifer,
Thank you for joining us today, Jennifer.
Jennifer, you are amazing. How do we get your books, and how do we get involved with everything you're doing online?
Absolutely. So you can get the book anywhere books are sold, and you can find me online at Jen Chesak. That's JenChesak at all of the social media outlets. And and so if you have questions for me, just DM me on Instagram.
That's awesome. Well, Jennifer, this has been a fantastic interview. Thanks for doing this. Dan, I will talk to you next week, and IQ, I guess I will talk to you on Thursday. Thanks to everybody, and we will talk to everybody soon. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great day.
There she goes, the fantastic Jennifer Chesnick, and, of course, the amazing IQ Rizzoli.